Hello, my name's Peter Cinnamon and you're very welcome to a podcast which is all about the Irish League. There might have just been 4 games for us to skim our judging eyes over, but there was plenty to ponder as Glentoran's unbeaten streak finally comes to an end as Dungannon's recent uptick in form only builds momentum. Coleraine got back to winning ways by bouncing back in the derby. Carrick Rangers, they snagged 3 points at home to the Ports, and Bangor makes it a full sweep of losses across the division for bottom and pointless Glenavon. That's what's on your menu on this, your latest weekly edition of Kick and Match. And if you ever question the dedication of this podcast, we are doing this as Germany and Northern Ireland still battle out in this dramatic second half. You know in the future right now if it's adulation or despair coming our way. But here joining me with his own little hat of dedication, it is Stephen Alexander. Hello.
Hi Peter, how are you?
It's great to have you back on board, Stephen. I mean, it's been a funny little season for your team and for many teams across the league. I know I was pumping up the idea that this could be the quarter season catch-up. We're just sticking a pin in that ever so slightly for this week, but we can give you a bit of a chance to set your stall out. We're almost there at the quarter part. How would you summarise the Irish League season you've seen so far?
Quite possibly to use a word that Ballymena boss Jim Irvin used a couple of weeks ago in an interview. Crazy, Peter, would probably be a good way of summing it up. I mean, there's just been so many sort of interesting twists and subplots, haven't there? I mean, you know, at the top end of the table, you might be looking at it and saying, yep, sort of the usual, the expected protagonists up there. Who on earth could have predicted the Glenavon scenario? Who on earth could have predicted Bangor's marvelous start? You know, again, just it never disappoints, Peter. Sure, it doesn't. There's always some sort of twists and turns.
This is perhaps a little bit of a preview of what we'll focus on next week. But when you look at the table and you see where the teams are, they haven't made a huge big points marker just yet by the fact that a majority of the quote-unquote top 4 haven't played their full schedule of games. But looking at it and seeing the teams, it feels like it's very top-heavy when it comes to how fans view this season, is that there's always going to be teams that expected to do well, aren't doing well, teams that perhaps expected to struggle but are doing a lot better. But I look at the table and I see maybe 3 to 4 happy teams. I'm not saying they're just the ones that are up there. I see 3 or 4 happy teams, fan base wise, and the rest of the league is looking at themselves going, either this is frustratingly middling or it's very poor.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There would probably be more teams with cause at this stage to be unhappy than there are teams with cause to be happy. Definitely, possibly you're talking about coming up to that sort of quarter point of the season. It's a weekend past was match day 11, wasn't it? So a few teams have played against every other team. I always kind of, in my mind, that's almost like a sort of a marker post as such. The only thing about it is, unfortunately, because we're so many games behind already in this season due to European commitments, international call-ups, strange weather conditions there. And I think, Peter, the one thing that I feel sort of that we've missed so far, we've missed some of those really big matchups that we're really looking forward
You're totally
to.
Right.
Obviously, yeah, we've got Corey and Linfield's rearranged for the end of this month. We've still got Linfield and Larne. We still have Glentoran and Larne, which was called off. So I think possibly maybe once we start to get a few of those tidied up, we might begin to see the league table take shape in a much more normal fashion.
I think you've nailed the feeling of why it's so hard to establish particularly where some of the teams near the top of the table are, because you're right, we saw Coleraine against Larne, which was this odd tetchy game to start the season, which one goal splits them. You have a good result from a Glentoran point of view against Linfield, and outside of that, maybe you might do Glens beating Coleraine, good stuff for them, but yeah, you haven't really felt like these. Now, they're rarely thrillers, but we have not got to see enough, is probably the word I'd describe it as, enough of the big boys against each other. So everyone's still trying to jimmy for position, which is usually what this part of the season's about. We've had our first run in the League Cup, which we'll get to. But you talked about there, you can judge teams based on where they are because it's the first time they've got to play every single team, or most teams will be able to play every other team that's around them. You'll do that 2 more times, then you have the split. We've seen Glenavon play every single side in this division, and they're sitting there without a clean sheet, without anything that isn't a loss. The stat came out there from the Sweeper podcast saying that they are the worst team in Europe, and that was before this weekend's results. These are all things that Glenavon fans know very well. Ever since Paddy McLaughlin has moved on and they had this search for the manager, it has gone from bad to worse, because there has been no manager moving on bounce. They lose to their nearest rivals in Portadown, which probably was a bigger game from a just table perspective, because it looks as though they are the 2 lowest sides in the division just from a quality point of view. And then Bangor, the team who I think has a bit of there's a bit of symbolism there, the team that's come up, who is expected to be the 12th team in the division. And yes, they've had a strong start, but to go into your home patch and just toss you around and almost embarrass you. I think I've talked over the past while about there being maybe a prong or 2 in Glenavon and their premiership status even this early. But I think that'll be a marker, what happened on Saturday, of this perhaps something has now really dawned on Glenavon fans of the reality of the position that they're in.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, oh, blimey, where do we even begin with the Glenavon situation? First of all, hats off to Michael O'Connor for taking on the job. I'm sure probably a lot of other established managers maybe looked at the situation, and they're maybe looking, if things go badly wrong, they're maybe looking at potentially having a relegation in their CV, and they're maybe thinking, no, I'll sit this one out and see what club comes up next. It's I mean, I wasn't surprised that Glenavon have gone for someone from outside of the usual merry-go-round of names. Maybe someone looking for a crack at management at this level. I mean, there's going to be no real sense of expectation upon Michael O'Connor's shoulders, because he's been dealt a very poor hand. I think people chatting to a couple of Glenavon fans, and they say no matter what happens this season, it's not going to be on him. Because he's just been probably given an awfully long way to come back from, an awfully big mountain to climb. If he can somehow turn that situation around, it could stand him in very good stead for the future. I mean, I've been mystified by Glenavon's start, Peter, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, I didn't think their summer transfer window was particularly good. I thought they might struggle a bit, but obviously not to the extent that they have. Difficult to know just how it went so badly wrong under Paddy McLaughlin. It's worth noting, I should say, Peter, that each of Glenavon's last 2 managers have experienced similar scenarios. Firstly, Stephen O'Donnell initially got a bit of a tune out of Gary Hamilton's squad, and then Paddy got some good results out of Stephen McDonnell's panel. The problem in both instances is that when both those managers actually got the chance to bring in their own players, it all seemed to go unravel from there.
Why would you say that you didn't like the transfer window that they had? Is it hindsight's 2020 here, or because a lot of people thought that they'd brought in bodies at the back and they'd went for young with potential mixed in with players with a lot of experience. And there's been plenty of talk about the High Murphys and the McClellans coming in, but perhaps the ones that have been forgotten about are the likes of the Chris Lowe's. Is the fact that he's barely kicked a ball for them perhaps highlighting of why you did not think these were the right moves to get going in the direction they wanted to be?
Yeah, I mean, possibly rightly or wrongly, Peter, I have this sort of habit whenever, during a summer transfer window, I look at a club, at which players have moved out, which positions they play in, and who they've got in to replace them. And I'm always sort of looking, well, do they look stronger in those positions now than they did last season? Obviously, you look at the sort of the 2 fullback positions. Obviously, the pair of them were David Turry and Len O'Sullivan, hugely impressive for Glenavon last season. They lost both of those. That's two difficult things to fill straight away. Are the players who replaced them of that similar standard? You touched upon Chris Lowe there, enormously steady, reliable player, just probably sort of with injury problems over the last number of years, didn't play as much as he would have liked at Cliftonville. I think just I sort of looked at it and thought the players maybe that have gone out were maybe, and the players that come in maybe left them slightly weaker. But I mean, nobody, never in a million years, if you'd have said to me, they'll be sitting with no points after 11 games, I would have laughed at that suggestion.
It's been highlighted on this podcast for the past few weeks, but it does need reiterating. They're the worst team when it comes to... It's a historically bad team, this, and a historically bad start to the season. It is edging towards it. I think the past 2 weeks have added more fuel to this fire, but we are already in the conversation of already down. I do think that is absolutely premature, but I don't think we're too far away from it not being premature if things don't turn around.
And all my time watching the Irish League, Peter, I can't ever recall a new manager having to step into a situation as sort of desperate looking at this early stage as what Michael O'Connor has now inherited. And it's, people are saying all the usual things about, oh, they're too good to go down, they're too big to go down, which is a real bugbear of mine, I have to say. Yes, absolutely. Glenavon have a brilliant ground and a rich history. The litmus test for any football club at any level, what are they producing on the pitch? All the other spin-offs come from what happens on the pitch. And it's a huge aspect. Let's see how things go for Glenavon. There's a lot of chat among their fans about the possibility of relegation, and they will have seen that teams who go down to the Championship, which is a really dog-eat-dog division, they don't always automatically return straight away. Thinking of the likes of Ballymena, never came back up. Loughgall this season, while again too early to write them off, they're already some distance behind the leading teams. Portadown had a real battle to get back up, and Newry went the opposite way entirely. They went straight through the Championship with back-to-back relegation. So it's definitely not the place that any Premiership club, especially a long-established one like Glenavon, want to find themselves in.
And that's where the question will be, and I did somewhat bring that up to Dave Watt, and I discussed it last week. When do Glenavon start planning for the Championship? Because if we're looking at lessons that have been learnt from this experience, not for just Glenavon but maybe other teams, it's that experience is very, very valuable in this league. And if you have too many players coming in who perhaps aren't really instilled with the club, just haven't got that nous that you need to try and build a squad around, you kind of don't have those tent poles to hold it all together. You could go individually and say there's talents from here and there, but if anybody's seen Glenavon this season, they just do not complement each other at all. They were brought in to play a system which doesn't work. They're now on their downers, and I don't know if many players who they signed came in to be a part of this project on the contracts and on the money with the idea that they were going to be playing Championship football next season. If Glenavon committed themselves to players who they can afford to be a Championship player and also not producing, look, there's a chance come 4 or 5 months or a couple of weeks under a new manager and maybe expectations changed and aims slightly altered, a tune could be had out of this team. But based on what we've seen over the past 2 weeks, it ain't getting better. It wasn't just a situation where these players had fallen out with the manager, or that may have played a role ever so slightly, and they just were so frustrated they weren't turning up. Paddy McLaughlin's been gone for those 2 weeks, and you look at some of the commentary from Glenavon fans off the back of being beat 3-0 from a team who was in the Championship last year, and there's vivid anger from them based on, one, what they're saying on the pitch, and two, them looking around each other and asking, how did we get here? Like, you talk about the size of job that O'Connor has. It's huge.
Yeah, I mean, he's as I say, he's very brave to take it on. Where, as I say, some other maybe more experienced managers, and ordinarily, if the Glenavon job come up at any time, I would expect to see the usual sort of the usual suspects applying for it. Maybe this time, just the predicament that they find themselves in, maybe made it that bit sort of less appealing. But look, I suppose Michael O'Connor's got nothing to lose. He can only probably enhance his reputation because he's just starting out as a manager at this level. Whether he can get something pulled together from the wreckage of this season, I'm not sure. I agree with what you said earlier. I think it's still a bit too early to write them off entirely. If you could stitch 2 or 3 wins together on the bounce, the picture could look completely different. But at the moment, it's very, very hard to see where those 2 or 3 wins in the bounce are coming from.
What does the fact that Glenavon did go for O'Connor, what do you think that tells you about the thinking within the club in regards to what they've seen previously? And I think they're obviously looking back. It's not ancient history here from Hamilton to McDonald to McLaughlin. They've gone for someone who's not long finished playing in the Irish League, and obviously playing football beyond that. He does have a wee bit of experience connected to Glenavon, but also being a bit of a coach and background teams within the league. So they must think that between him and the backroom team that they have, it's going to be the special sauce. Maybe they want new thinking.
Possibly, sometimes just it's nice to see sort of a variation from the usual merry-go-round of managers who sort of go to a club, maybe feel there, and within a few weeks they've pitched up somewhere else. It's just, it's a brave decision on his part to go for it, to go in at them. But
I actually would agree with that because he's highly
yeah,
rated and highly touted, and
yeah,
there is a scenario where this doesn't improve and Glenavon have to go, sorry, I know these aren't your players and we're restricting you significantly on what your recruitment is, and also you're hamstrung by the fact that potentially by January, if you're, let's say, 13, 14 points off 11th, players simply don't want to come to you anyway, and you're not getting results, and the board goes, ugh, bad feeling here, we're gonna have to change it again. So it's not like this season is a total give it a go, lad, because I'm sure that board hasn't admitted defeat here at all
no,
either.
certainly you would like to hope not, but again, it's as sometimes happens. You know, a manager that had the sort of longevity of reign that Gary Hamilton did at Mourneview Park. And then there's sort of almost echoes of the Alex Ferguson at Man United here, someone who was there for so long and who brought success in relative terms, in that, they were always there or thereabouts for maybe an Irish Cup win. They were always in what you would call a respectable position in the league. There was certainly none of this sort of battling at the bottom of the table. But again, like Sir Alex at Man United, whenever he left, anybody who succeeded him found it very difficult to get things moving in the right direction. And Glenavon have been through a couple of managers now in a relatively short space of time, and are on to another one. And the outlook possibly doesn't look any more positive than it did with the previous two.
Let's talk about the game on Saturday, because I do need to check myself, because every time I've talked this season about a success for Bangor, it's always after the fact that I've talked about how, Team X is down, Team X is feeling bad, when you look at the table and they're doing a lock all, doing a Newry, doing a Ports, they're the new bit of fresh air. It's almost becoming so predictable. It's not a breath of fresh air. It's championship team coming up, doing well, probably getting more out of their players than you expect. But I said it last week. I think this was actually a big deal for Bangor. 15 points now. They're off. They're off 12th. It's until they're safe. They aren't, and you're even looking at. Yeah, they're not a million miles away from 11th either, despite how well they're doing. They've got these games in hand, and we've often seen, actually regularly, we've seen the fact that come maybe December, some of these injuries come in, a player's form gets nerfed ever so slightly. the bumpy ride comes in. So for Bangor, it is important while you're hot, build up the points. But in the same way, you would say, well, some people are saying maybe Glenavon could be down and out. There's equal whispers saying looks as though Bangor are going to be a Premiership team next year. I think that's maybe a bit too far, but it's as impressive as I think they could hope for when it came to where they were hoping at the start of the season.
Absolutely. I mean, I think you've touched upon it there. You've hit the nail on the head. They're following in the footsteps of the newly promoted clubs of recent seasons. They're getting their hard work done now while they still have they've got the points on the board while they still have that sort of element of surprise about them. I always think sort of statistically, if you look back on it, I don't have the figures. I'm talking anecdotally here. By the time that you come to play your second block of 11 matches, the newly promoted club generally doesn't pick up as many points in that block of 11 games as they did in their first block of 11, because maybe possibly by that stage the other clubs have maybe sussed them out a bit there. They've maybe sort of understand how they play. But 15.5 wins, it's incredible stuff. It's a brilliant story. It's great to see this, because I'm of a vintage, Peter, where I can remember really good Bangor teams under John Flanagan and Nigel Best. To me, when I was growing up, Bangor were an established, a big Irish League club, and it really has saddened me to see their demise and dropping down. The very thought of, obviously with me sort of coming from Ballymena and having worked in newspapers in Ballymena, I know the Ballymena and Provincial Intermediate League very well. And, it's a really well-run league, fantastic league. But just, I can still sort of remember looking at it and seeing Bangor's name appearing in that. And I'm just like, what is going on here? That Bangor have dropped through the divisions, dropped out of the Irish League pyramid and had to rebuild from that lowly position. And it's terrific to see just how they have managed to come back up through the division. And there's been no sort of magic wand or no huge amounts of money thrown at it. There's been hard work and there's been perseverance and sticking with a manager and letting a manager build something over a period of time. Even funnily enough, Peter, Bangor have been brilliant, but I've covered them a couple of times this season, and they've lost both the games I've covered. So I think Lee will be wanting to see me banned from any Bangor games. But the thing about that, I saw them lose to Glentoran at the Oval, but they were defended really stubbornly that day, and just one individual mistake led to the goal, which proved the only goal of that game. The other time I saw them, they lost 4-0 at Ballymena. They were a wee bit off it that day. But the thing that really impressed me was Lee Feeney came out afterwards and, there's no overreaction. There was no hitting the panic button. He goes, look, these boys are still adapting to this league. And he goes, and results like that particular day, he says, that just goes to show how quickly they have to adapt. And they certainly have adapted. They've signed wisely to add to what they had already assembled. Maybe eyebrows raised at signing Mark Hockey, given his incredibly bad luck in recent years with injuries. But you're sort of looking, Mark Hockey going to Bangor, 3G pitch. Touch wood, he gets a good injury-free run, because he is absolutely vital as a leader and organiser in that defence. Talking about leaders, the skipper, Rhys Neal, is a brilliant story, having come through the various divisions with them and a few promotions, and now he is having the absolute time of his life in the Premiership.
He is one of the standout performers, isn't he? And just feels like the absolute spirit of the side right now. They are getting so much out of this side. I think they bring everything to every single game that they play. They keep it relatively tight at the back, but saying that, they're not just batten down the hatches, and they're not just packing the defense. They always have that outball with Arthurs and other players up near the top, and it's the mix that you always need to do. You need to get experienced players in who want to fight and they can be healthy. tick, talking about hockey. You need those players to take the step up from the championship to take on all these top flight experienced teams. Tick, Neil, Arthurs. And on top of that, you just need to find one or two players that perhaps other sides either didn't feel were good enough quality, or players who haven't really fulfilled their potential, and you say, here's an opportunity to do that. And you've got to say, between Lynch and to a lesser extent Jay Boyd, they're getting that. Everything's going pretty well for them, as we suggest. Rarely does that happen in football, but they are absolutely one of the stories. And as it keeps on going, I think Lee Feeney's stock is rising immensely as well, because it as you've mentioned there, it has been years of building and disappointment along the way. I'm thinking about that season when it was like a 4-team race trying to get out, and Bangor were one of the favourite teams, and they miss out completely, and it was Institute who slipped ahead of them to play against your Ballymena. But the one thing that stuck out to me there, just to reflect on how you say Bangor used to be this big team when you remember covering the league, and then they faded away, and it's taken so long for them to come back. Bar that flash when the first 12-team league came in, where they were up, and then they were down for non-footballing reasons before the season was over. There's probably some people sitting there thinking, if Glenavon don't get their act together, could we be talking about them in a very similar vein?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen it there with, as I said earlier, the Newry situation. Teams sort of, once they get into that downward spiral, it's very, very hard to get out of it. We have to hope from Glenavon's point of view that things will turn around. Whether it will turn around quickly enough or adequately enough to salvage this season, I don't know. But it's a sad situation. I don't like to see any team sort of languishing, cut miles adrift at the bottom of a division. Especially not a long established club. I think you touched upon it there earlier, Peter, as well. Just the very fact with the league table and points tallies, the very fact that there is one team that's sort of outstandingly cut adrift at the bottom means that above them, the gap between, as you say, Bangor in 6th and the 10th and 11th place teams, it's not that many points, just simply because everybody's taking points off Glenavon. And it wouldn't take that much. It wouldn't, a run of 3 or 4 successive defeats, and you could very quickly find yourself sliding back down that table.
Well, off the back of last weekend, where it was a great weekend for the likes of Glentoran and Linfield, even though they weren't playing games because of what happened with Coleraine and Lawrence slipping up. It was a bigger derby than usual for Coleraine to get back on track away from home. They do that against a trickier Ballymena than we've seen in previous years. They've been hot, they've been cold, and unfortunately for your Sky Blues, it doesn't work out. But you probably couldn't have gotten off to a worse start. 2 minutes in, there's patching knocking it in.
Yeah, I mean, Peter, I've seen some close games this season between part-time clubs and full-time clubs. We've seen a few part-time clubs topple full-time clubs, really good victories. Unfortunately, this was not a close game between a part-time club and a full-time club. Coleraine were some distance ahead of Ballymena, in my opinion. This, particularly that first half, where I thought they were absolutely streets ahead of Ballymena. You may not see a better 45-minute performance from any team this season. And the strange thing about it, Peter, I was getting ready for the match on Saturday. I was at the showgrounds. I had sort of done my various pre-match preparation, and I was keeping an eye on Colerane's warm-up, which was taking place just right in front of me. You could just sense the focus and the intensity in that warm-up, and they just took that straight into the match. The very first thing, you're right, the very first thing, you're going away to your fiercest rivals. It's a raucous atmosphere at Ballymena, a really good derby atmosphere. The first thing you want to do is to silence the home crowd, and that's exactly what Coleraine did. Very fitting that it was Will Patching who scored that first goal because he was the best player in the pitch in the first half. He went off in the second half with a bit of a knock, but the hard yards had been done by that stage. Coleraine will certainly hope that taking him off was purely a precaution rather than anything more sinister.
People, I think, throughout the league, just because of the nature of quote unquote money teams, have been hoping that this whole Coleraine project, particularly this season, was going to struggle from the fact that there was a decent amount of names brought in the summer. You probably look back and we see the way that Glenavon struggled and others. Perhaps it proves how important it was to actually rush through some of those names in January, because it's just helped establish a couple of more names while these other players have come in and having to settle in their own right. And I think many people were hoping that this Coleraine thing was going to be a bit of a disaster, as maybe some would describe it, particularly in the early parts of last year. They get off to a great start, beating Larne, and then they go through a couple of games still getting results. And last weekend, losing in the way that they did, many people thought, here we are, finally, once you've given them a rattle, once you've given them a shake, then we'll see how they'll react. Will these players be hungry? Will they fight? Or will they huff and flounce and scoring a goal instantly? You saw that determination. It shows perhaps the type of guile and really that top end when it comes to football in this island experience, which Rory Higgins has, how when he's able to take time with these players every single day, he can get that mentality, because that was the big thing most people were going to question about this side. You knew 1 to 11, the quality was going to be up there when it came to this division, but was it all going to blend together? And at times, I've seen it, and it's scary.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, Peter, strangely enough, Coleraine, they played some fantastic football at times on Saturday, but the thing that really impressed me was the work rate and the hunger. I'm talking about possibly, Sean O'Neill might roll the ball out to one of his two centre backs, to Stephen O'Donnell or to Kim Nelson. Straight away, somebody's on them. Shevlin, Okoro, Glagan, just instantly closing them down, making Ballymena rush it. The work that the likes of Joel Cooper, Jamie Glagan put in off the ball was incredible. There was one brilliant moment, actually, Peter. I don't know if you saw it in the Niffle highlights, where in the second half, it was right at the end of the game. It was in stoppage time, and Success Edigan was running up the left wing for Ballymena, and whenever Success Edigan, when he gets into gear, he's quite hard to keep track of. Jamie Glacken tracked him for a good 30 or 40 yards, stride for stride, before executing the most perfect sliding tackle you will ever see to win the ball. Jamie Glacken then gets up with the ball. Matthew Clark clatters him, gets booked. But Jamie Glacken's reaction to that was to go straight over to the Coleraine fans on that side of the ground, and he was celebrating his slide tackle with the same sort of gusto that you would celebrate a goal. It was terrific, and to me, it just summed up everything about Coreane's performance on Saturday. I mean, I think sometimes unfairly Jamie Glacken gets labelled with this sort of luxury player tag there, whereas I can remember hearing stories that, with the running stats, the number of kilometres that they clock up in a game, where he could have more kilometres under his belt than any other player during a game. Again, seems to be thriving under Rory Higgins' management, again, having the likes of a Patching, alongside him there. Terrific. But actually, Peter, for all the new signings, and the new signings have been pretty impressive for Coleraine. I think if we look at a couple of players who were already there, that the first one, obviously, again, returning to haunt his hometown club on Saturday, was Matthew Shevlin. It's strange, sometimes you speak to people in the Irish League, and for some inexplicable reason to me, Matthew Shevlin maybe isn't everybody's cup of tea. I think he has developed into a terrific Irish League striker. Again, it's the sort of thing. I followed Matthew's career closely, Peter, because obviously working in newspapers in Ballymena at that time, we would have been getting, he's not an out and out Ballymena United Academy graduate. He started off at another club, Coleraine Youth, and obviously, whenever I was working in the paper, we would be getting reports in every week from Coleraine Youth, and you start to see these names start to jump out at you like every week. Matthew Shevlin and hat trick, Matthew Shevlin man of the match. Eventually, he goes to Ballymena. Just to try and sort of further himself playing at a higher level. Now, he's still, this was probably when he's maybe 13, 14. What happened, Peter? And I remember speaking to people at Ballymena about this. They put him in at his own age group at Ballymena. He scored a bagful. So they moved him up a couple of years, playing with people a couple of years. He continues to score. They put him into the youth team. So he's in the under 18s. He continues to score. They put him in the reserves. He continues to score goals. And the next thing you know, he's in Glenn Ferguson's first team squad. Now, whenever he came on that day to make his debut against Ballymena, I think he was still about maybe a month or a couple of months shy of his 16th birthday.
Yeah, he was 15, 16.
Yeah, so he came on as a sub, and I can vividly remember this, Peter. I can vividly remember saying to my colleague and my great friend Billy Weir, who was sitting beside me in the press box, I went, "This is the kid there that I was telling you about that's been scoring so many goals that they've brought him through." So they take the corner. There's a bit of a pinball, bang into the net. Guess who? Matthew Shevlin scores with his first touch in the Irish League about 15 seconds after coming on at the age of 15. Again, he was, there were huge high hopes for him. I can remember sort of, it seemed to be every week, I seemed to be writing a story in the paper about which English or Scottish club it was who was being linked with him that particular week. And it seemed that he was maybe destined to, go across the water, maybe make a good career. As sometimes happens, that didn't work out for him. He's gone on to carve out a very good career in the Irish League. And I still look at him and I still think to myself, there's a guy there in any given season who will get you somewhere in and around 20 goals a season. And that's, if you're going to be challenging, that's what you want. The other player, I suppose, Peter, and again, from a perspective of being a former Ballymena player, is there a more underrated player in the Irish League than Dylan Boyle? He has been terrific.
Everyone forgets about him. He's the type of player that when you're watching the game, you're like, who's that fella playing? And he's just nicking the ball away, covering space, making that pass out of nowhere that just opens up the side. He's this somewhat boring, no-name signing, which Coleraine added, that everyone thinks he's sitting there for some other player. He must be injured or suspended. And then you look back and go, oh, wait, he's been playing for the guts of a year and a bit. And he's quality. He's diminutive, but he's great.
I would say probably, Peter, he's one of those players who's probably one of the first names on Rory Higgins' team sheet every week. I can remember whenever he signed for Ballymena, he came back home from England, having been at Fleetwood. He came back to Northern Ireland. He signed for Ballymena. It was Jim Irvin's first season in charge. It was a real struggle. That was the season where Ballymena narrowly avoided relegation. Dylan Boyle stood out like a sore thumb in that team. I think it was inevitable that he was going to move on at some point. Just watching him again on Saturday, as you say, if the play breaks up, it's either him breaking it up, or if it does break up, he's the one who's there to tidy it up and just move it on and give it to the attacking players. He's just the sort of player any successful team needs.
And it looks as though the way they're playing, they will be a successful team in Coleraine. Where they'll eventually end up, as we said, there's plenty more football to be played, and I think some key battles to finally get bashed out. You talk about Glacken. I think this form started, I know it was a previous manager, but I think it started last year when he just found his own little space kind of in the number 10 central area where, be it confidence, be it just a bit of, whatever niggle at finally gone to the west side, he looked like he had the confidence. He's the player that, if you're an away fan, he's the first one you're giving stick to, because you just want him to have a bad game, because you worry of your heart in your throat every time he's on the ball. There's plenty of quality in this Coleraine team, and you still mentioned it. Shevlin's probably the odd one out in the sense that he's the one that was there before all the money that's came in. So sometimes fans and maybe other people from outside the club can get caught up in the idea of fancy newer toys. The stats back it up. Shevlin has been one of the consistent players when it comes to the forward part of the pitch that there has been in the league for the past 5-7 years, and perhaps get undervalued just because the way he plays the game, he isn't always right in the middle of all the plays. He's there oftentimes just tidying up or finding his position. It's a skill which some of the best players in the world have, and ultimately the only thing he's really paid to do is knock it in the back of the net. That's what he did on Saturday. Let's talk about your Ballymena side, because I don't know if they've got really an in-depth look on this podcast this season. I look at them, and I was the high man, in the sense that if you go back to the first podcast of the year, I was saying that I think that they were more than just top six contenders. I think that's probably what the aim should be. That's starting to look like a bit more of a sensible take now, the way that some of the league is starting to fall. But Jim Irvin signs that big extension earlier on in the year, late of the season. Few heads being turned. The investment continued during the summer. I know it's starting to look like it's a reality, but I think there was big pressure on Jim Irvin at the start of the season, and maybe until things start to settle out and maybe a bit of a gap is established, there probably still is a bit of pressure.
Yeah, I mean, Ballymena have been their usual sort of enigmatic selves. You know, if you look at the league table tally of 16 points from the first block of 11 games, it's neither earth-shattering nor is it disastrous by any means. I mean, actually asked Jim on Saturday, you know, you've played everybody, you've played all 11 teams. How do you assess Ballymena's first block of the season? He goes, well, we're fifth in the table, and the four teams that are above us are the four full-time teams. So, you know, he says, don't get me wrong, we could be, we've probably, there's maybe points that we have dropped that we shouldn't have, but you know, realistically, look back at the results, Peter. They've probably maybe beaten the teams that you would expect Ballymena to beat, and maybe barring the win over Linfield, they've probably lost to the teams that you might expect them to lose to. The difficulty, I think, you know, what is success going to look like for Ballymena this season? You know, 2 years ago, it was very, very narrowly avoiding relegation in that playoff. The thought of which still makes me shudder to this day. Then I think that sort of focused a few minds behind the scenes at Ballymena, and you know, there was a bit of investment came in, trying to strengthen that squad, try to improve that squad. Obviously, there was no relegation battle last season. Ninth, you know, could have been better, maybe could have been worse, possibly. But again, another sort of fairly significant summer of attracting players. So, you know, what is the target now? Is the target top six? You know, that you could ask that question about a lot of clubs in the Irish Premier. What would success look like for club A, B, and C? You know, because it's maybe that has maybe possibly changed from what it was even a couple of years ago.
The one, and I would say, criticism I have of this squad, because I can see the potential, I can see how some pieces of this are really solid, where you could build a very strong squad. There has been investment, you're absolutely right. Some big names, some big outlays. You know, Ben Kennedy's the one that, even though it's a season old now, catches the eye. I look at this 11 and I'm still yet to really get my head around of, one, what's your best 11, and two, what shape complements what you're trying to achieve the most. Because when I look at it, I see a couple of not even square pegs and round holes, just kind of players that are kind of in areas that doesn't really complement the other parts of the team to the best extent, perhaps.
Yeah, there's maybe one or two things. I think sort of a lot of people have been maybe looking at the fact Dara O'Connor maybe hasn't played as many minutes as he would like. You know, another one who looks quite lively whenever he comes on is young Jack O'Reilly. But again, having started a couple of games, maybe the impact he made maybe wasn't as effective as sometimes when he has come on as a sub. You know, there are one or two things. There's probably, if you look at it, Peter, if you're going to be objective about it, you're probably maybe looking at Ballymena's, you know, attacking options, and there's not really that sort of 20 goal a season Matthew Shevlin type goal scorer among the the options that are open to Jim.
Well,
I think at the moment, I think possibly as well, Ballymena is suffering a wee bit from injuries to particularly to midfield personnel. You know, McElhaney, Josh Carson, Donal Rocks. So I was chatting to Donal on Saturday. He was telling me that he goes for an operation this week to repair meniscus in his knee. So you know, you're probably talking about couple or 3 months on the sidelines there. Again, the player who I think Ballymena have really missed from last season is Andy Scott, who has this injury which, you know, doesn't seem to be any closer to being resolved. He was a terrific outlet last season for Ballymena in terms of his ability to carry the ball forward, to run at defenders, to commit
particularly the on.
opposing defenders. Yeah. So I think Ballymena have been sort of left possibly a wee bit weakened in midfield, which maybe isn't helping. But again, it's been a reasonable start. You know, there are things to be pleased about with it, but equally, I think sort of, you know, you see there's some fans sort of would be critical of what they see as, you know, the style of play. It's again, it's a results driven business. I'm not really too much into this sort of, oh, this lovely football there. So at that level of football, to me, lovely football is great. If you can do it and win games, brilliant. But to me, lovely football is when you're playing five-a-side with your mates and you can do all the fancy flicks and tricks there. At that level, you want to see a winning team, whether no matter sort of what way that comes about.
Yes, no. Players of this level aren't just playing five-a-side. Like, what we do though have is a squad where I look at it and it's about three at the back is what you usually play.
Yeah, there's been sort of variations of that in recent times, but it would be, yes, he's sort of he has favoured kind of three central defenders for much of the season. Again, he's sort of David Toure has basically made the right wing back slot his own. There's been sort of variations at left wing back with Joel Thompson, Matthew Clark. Matthew Clark has also played as the left
Yes,
side central defender.
that's what was expected. He'd be left centre back, or he would
Yeah,
be
yeah.
left
And,
wing.
and again, yeah, I mean, there's, you know, the usual faces are in there. Stephen O'Donnell, Kim Nelson. The one who's probably maybe can feel a wee bit hard done by is Dahi McCallion, who has been on the bench. And again, Ali Gold, the Scottish defender who they brought in the summer, started, you know, the first 4 or 5
If I could
games.
chisel a centre back out of granite, he would look gold.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, those pair can probably sort of maybe feel hard done by, but you know, it's the guys who have played. They haven't done badly at all defensively. It's just to say maybe lacking that wee bit of bite with the likes of Carson out, lacking that wee bit of craft with McElhaney out, lacking the energy of Donal Rocks, and you know the speed and pace and ball carrying of Andy Scott. So you know each of those players that I've mentioned sort of bring their own individual attributes to the team, and Ballymena are probably just missing that at the moment.
And something to be excited about in Corbally and Hood. I think those players are maybe going under the radar of the overall Irish League when it comes to just the kind of young talent that they are. Should they be nailed on starters starting week in and week out at this level? You know, maybe there's question marks, and as you alluded to, that's probably more connected to the other players that are out. But I would fully expect these players to be very well known Irish League names in maybe 6 months to a year.
Yeah, Cian Corbally in particular has impressed me immensely since he came in January. Again, he has that benefit now of having had half a season in the Irish Premiership behind him. I really expected him to hit the ground running this season. Again, sort of, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? He's got to know the league. The league has also
Got to
got to
know
know
him.
him. So you know, again, he has tended to come in for a bit of extra attention as well this season. But a terrific player, and a player who you really like to see getting on the ball. You always kind of think whenever Cian Corbally gets the ball that, you know, something might well happen here. James Hood still very young, but again, a bundle of energy. He gets through an immense amount of work in midfield. Again, whether when all the other midfield options are available. Aaron Jarvis is another one who plays regularly, who was missing on Saturday. Whenever some of those are back available to Jim, will James Hood be the one to miss out? Who knows? But again, he's given a very good account of himself.
McNichol was the signing which stood out to me during the summer in the sense that he's a striker, he's a big boy, and I wouldn't say he's completely different to what you have, but he was definitely brought in with the aim that he was going to give you that different option compared to some of the players that you have, and maybe potential incomings as well. It took a while for him to get his chance in the team.
Yes, it did. There was a long part the early weeks of the season there, Peter, where he wasn't even maybe featuring in the match day squad of 18. I think
I
the
thought he
thing
was
about
injured
him,
because of that.
yeah, it's he. The thing I think with Ryan McNichol that maybe people overlook is I think people assume that he's really young. He's not terribly young. He must, he's probably 24, 25. He's maybe older than people think. He's come through this whole thing. He's been playing, intermediate football. He then goes to Distillery, scores goals at that, goes to Newry, scored a lot of goals last season in the championship in a team that ultimately were relegated. So I think he's probably earned his chance. He has had to be patient. Jim talked about that in recent weeks. Certainly has put in a couple of good performances and the goals that he scored the winning goal in the league win at Carrick, followed that up a few days later with the only goal against Ballymena in the League Cup. So again, it's maybe a different type of striker to what Ballymena have. Ballymena have, Calvin McCurry has another player who absolutely works his socks off up front, possibly maybe hasn't got the number of goals that he would like. Again, Success Edigan is a real handful as you've seen him in action there. There's a sort of a glorious unpredictability, I think, sometimes with him.
It's funny how everybody says that about him, isn't it?
You're not just quite sure what's going to happen when it gets to Success's feet, but once he moves into gear and moves up through the gears, he is hard to stop. So again, you would like to see him probably maybe get a bit of a run and maybe a wee bit more sort of support up alongside him rather than maybe having a striker up there who's maybe a wee bit isolated. But certainly, probably, I think other fans of other clubs have probably pinpointed it straight away. What I said earlier, they're just lacking. Ballymena are just lacking that sort of 15 to 20 goal a season striker.
Well, you may plead the fifth here if you so desire, but I find this interesting in an interview with Rory Higgins that was posted by the Belfast Telegraph last week, and he was talking about the game ahead of time and Ballymena, and he said that he believed that Ballymena had gone under the radar in terms of the investment that they put into the squad. They made basically a league record fee for one of our players 2 days before the window closed. It's a fee this club has never ever paid for a player, so they made an astronomical fee for one of our players. And as much as people enjoy talking about big spending Coleraine and cash-rich Coleraine, I think it's not just us. Is this well known who this player was, or can I speculate?
I can remember, Peter, at the time hearing a lot of talk that the player in question was Matthew Shevlin.
I was just going to suggest that.
Because I can remember hearing rumours about sort of whether this was the sort of thing where maybe people in Ballymena were creating this rumour just simply because they wanted it to be true more so than there was any truth in it.
And we've been there at many a club.
I think it was the rumour, the speculation was, I've heard Matthew's not happy with the full-time setup and wants to go back to his job and back to playing part-time football. And this sort of started to grow legs, this rumour. So whether there was a bid made or not, I'm not entirely sure. I was surprised to see Rory come out and say that one publicly, ahead of the Derby match. But certainly, a player like Matthew Shevlin would be just exactly what Ballymena would need,
especially if it was a massive fee, as it's being suggested there. What is the truth to that? We'll just have to stick a pin in that. But yeah, there's no doubt for Ballymena, They've invested, you would probably describe well, because there's been an absolute improvement in this team. When we do talk about Glenavon and some of their foibles, you would say that maybe Ballymena could have been the more recent case study in regards to, you don't invest, you bring in a lot of new talent, and it doesn't all flow together, and you could be stuck in the mud very easily. And look, you were a goal and a couple of minutes away from Ballymena being in a very different place. The problem is for Glenavon, not to go back to that, but they could be in a position where they don't have the opportunity that Ballymena did have, was to reset and go again. January will be interesting, but I do strongly believe that the goals will hopefully come in one way or the other. It's that inconsistency, but you're just looking strong at the back, and overall, your home form is probably keeping you going without totally losing the plot away from home either.
Yeah, well, I mean, the one thing about it, I think possibly you look back in recent weeks, some of Ballymena's most recent home performances have been maybe some of the poorest ones. I think back, there was a horrible sense of deja vu, Peter, on Saturday, conceding that early goal. Because Ballymena did virtually the same thing a few weeks ago against Glentoran. They conceded a goal inside the opening 10 minutes and never really looked like getting back into it. Again, there was in between those, there was a home game against Dungannon, who I thought won quite comfortably at the showgrounds. It's difficult to sort of put your finger on why maybe some of those recent home performances haven't been as good, but obviously the important thing is if you're not doing so well at home, that you continue to pick up points away from home. I don't envisage a situation, Peter, of Ballymena going on this sort of chaotic, crazy win and run like happened last season, but it's just trying to maybe stitch that run of 3 or 4 games unbeaten together. That I think that might be Ballymena might be a sort of win one, lose one type of team this season.
Well, we're talking about teams who are on good runs. You can add a meeting of them on Saturday between the unbeaten Glens going to a bit of a sticky wicket for them, Stagmore Park against Dungannon. It looked sharp enough. They take a lead within the first 22, 25 minutes. But Dungannon Swifts, who after being threatened to be languishing down near the bottom, have been on a tear, winning a number of games on the bounce, and they've now followed up with, off the back of Larne, maybe their biggest scalp of the season by beating Glentoran, and it's all based on a great second half where the Glens were tormented by a familiar foe, a familiar face in Junior.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, what's that old saying, Peter? Form is temporary, class is permanent. Someone asked me in the opening few weeks of the season if I thought Dungannon could be among the teams battling out at the bottom end of the table, and my answer was an emphatic, well, no, I don't think they will be. I was really surprised at Dungannon's poor start, but then if you look back on it, sort of break it down a bit, think back to the early weeks. Declan Dunn got himself rather foolishly sent off after a game, missed a few matches. They have had to get over the loss of Dean Curry in the centre of defence following his retirement. Ballymena in midfield, he was maybe a bit unfortunate to be sent off. I think it was against Portadown, Peter, wasn't it, for that sort of high-footed challenge where he literally didn't see the opponent coming. Absolutely no malice in it, but by the letter of the law, it was a red card. So again, he was missing for a few games. And of course, they've had the conundrum of trying to replace John McGovern in attack. So if you take those positions, take those players, that's effectively an entire spine of last season's team that was absent for one reason or another in the opening weeks. Always sort of felt that when Dungannon got back into a better rhythm, that the results would come, and that's been the case. I think they're very much back on track. They needed to replace McGovern, as I say, and presumably Rodney McAree was also aware in advance that they would be losing Tomas Galvin to GAA commitments. So Rodney delved into his extensive contacts book and rekindled his relationship with Junior from their time together at Glentoran. He's
you must in Ballymena land. You must be thinking, guys, he was just there to be picked up.
yeah. Again, it's like this is the beauty, isn't it, of managers? It's the whole thing. I always say that at any time there are players out there, just if you just know where to look, and then obviously sort of someone with as many contacts as Rodney has in the game, that was a great one to pull in just at a time when they really needed it, because he can weigh in with goals, he can hold the ball up, he can sort of bring others into play. Just probably he was sort of the ideal type of signing that Dungannon needed just at that moment in time. And I don't think it's any coincidence that now that he has arrived, belatedly arrived, and sort of started to find his stride, I don't think it's any coincidence that Dungannon's results have improved.
Well, I'm sure there's many Glentoran fans who are saying it's not a coincidence that the whole game turned on a dime when Jordan Jenkins was sent off for a yellow card. Looks like what the referee believed happened was a high boot clipping Scott in the head. I I feel torn on this because I would be fuming if that was my team button turn. I mean, he flung the boot in the air, as many players would, to try and get the ball away. But I guess he just doesn't see the player, and if you clip him and you swing it, you're leaving yourself open for that. So I'm sure Declan Devine doesn't feel exactly the same way. He was so enraged he was sent off himself.
Yeah, I mean, probably Declan will be looking at that now and sort of reflecting that he probably could have avoided that, because now there's a scenario where he'll be missing from the touchline for a few games, for what is going to be a really hugely interesting time for Glentoran and for their fans. The big question now is how will they deal with their first setback of the season. Up until now, everything had been sort of fairly rosy in the garden. It looked impressive. Think any manager, Peter, will tell you how important momentum is. When you're winning and when you're playing well, you just want the games to keep coming. But just in recent weeks, events outside of Glentoran's control have sort of slowed their progress a wee bit. Halted by the weather. Match against Larne was off, waterlogged pitch. Then the trip to Solitude was off because of the storm, and it's just sort of, if you were playing every week and you're winning and everybody knows their job, everything's tickety boo. But now just it's been sort of disrupted to an extent, and it'll be interesting to see how they can recover. And the other thing as well to factor in, while Glentoran were on that unbeaten start, with every week that passed, they were closer to getting those suspended players back and those
But
injured players back. And now all of a sudden, you have them. Declan's going to have those players at his disposal, and now he's thinking, well, now to bring these boys back in to change this. Whereas the early weeks of the season, the team was maybe to an extent sort of picking itself. So this is the sort of conundrum that he's going to face. Obviously, it's all too fresh in Glentoran fans' minds about sort of how they crumbled a wee bit last season when the pressure was turned on, and they will be Glentoran fans will be particularly anxious to see that there's no repeat of that sort of thing this season.
the one thing we'll forget, and obviously this is in relation to Glentoran, who now fall off the top of the table with Coleraine overtaking them. But ultimately, how does it look here? If you add 3 wins on the Linfield, they're flying. So they're kind of the in brackets top of the table. But of course, these teams have to play each other as well. But Glens went back. That they're kind of top of the table again. So this was going to come. It is just about the reaction. We saw that Coleraine were able to deal with it. And now Glens will have to do it. Can Larne do it? Linfield were able to take that draw and then a loss to Ballymena and get 2 wins on the bounce. So loads of football to go, and it's just you kind of said it. It's that mix of form versus quality, because we knew exactly how brilliant Rodney McAree was last year, and there were whispers, I think, from some other fan bases saying, all you media hypers, Dungannon were your darlings by the end of it, and you were all loving Rodney McAree, and here he is finally being found out that everyone knows what this Dungannon team's all about. And it's 5 wins in 6 games, just the 1 loss. And they're back to doing what they do really well. Strong at home, scoring goals, looking solid, playing nice football. There's obviously a bit of a help from a red card, but there'll be Dungannon fans screaming, saying, well, we've been on the wrong side of a red card or two ourselves. And they're now up there from being a couple of weeks ago, being in a situation where it's they're on 0 points and Glenavon are on 0 points, and since that game, not only did Dungannon win, they get 3 points more. They've steamrolled and got a couple of four. You might say that's maybe inspiration for Glenavon that they can maybe get in the mix too. You've got the Crews in Cliftonville who currently occupy 11th and 10th, mainly because they've only played 9 games. But it really is so close around that 11th. That's the funny thing about it. Even you, sitting there in 5th with 16 points, probably don't feel brilliant about how close 11th is even this early in the season.
Yeah, I was just looking at that, sort of how congested that is from sort of 5th down to about, down to 11th. It's one of those things where I think some team in that bunch, in the middle of that bunch, will go on a wee run of winning 3 or 4 games. Like Dungannon have probably done it now. Somebody in there will go on a wee run, lift themselves up, take the pressure off themselves a bit. Somebody conversely will sort of go into a bit of a mini slide and come down the table. It's just I think probably the teams in the bottom half of the table, the first thing you look at is obviously, right, how many points are we ahead of 12th and automatic relegation? But your problem then is you still have not that terribly far behind any of those teams in the middle. You have 11th place, and that brings with it its own pitfalls, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And you're right. There could be teams that could sail away from all this, but of course, internally we could see teams sink like a stone. And could one of those sides be Carrick or Portadown? They faced off on Saturday, as not like it was some sort of very imaginative prediction, but I did say it was going to be dreadful by all accounts. It absolutely was. But most importantly, Carrick Rangers were the victor to stop their slide. They are now 8th with 13 points, having played 2 games less than the team that they slay in Portadown. And off the back of going away, I'm beating Cliftonville and then taking care of business against Glenavon. It's once again, it feels quite shaky out of nowhere. Portadown, after losing to Newry in the Cup and then losing to Carrick Rangers and then having a player sent off. Is it like 3 sendings off in 4 games, and alongside the injuries there? It's a strange place, Shamrock Park, and we'll get to that. But for Carrick, I think this is a vital victory for them.
Oh, absolutely much needed win for Carrick, Peter. Things had gone a wee bit off the boil for them after that brilliant start to the season.
And I was starting to worry that was a bubble. That's all that was. That was a couple of good weeks, and they've done okay but lost. But this is where it's going to go. So they'll hope they've stopped the slide. At least they've made a big dent in what could be a relegation rival, or at least 11th place rival for the rest of the season.
Yeah. I remember one thing actually, Peter, back in the summer that sort of jumped out at me. I was keeping an eye on the various Premiership clubs' pre-season preparations, and I remember noticing that Carrick had started their pre-season matches a lot later than most other clubs. I remember they went to the Welders in their first pre-season game, and they got absolutely walloped by a Welders side who had been maybe in training for maybe 3 or 4 weeks prior to that. I thought Carrick started very late. They only played about 5 pre-season games, and I remember wondering if they might go into the season a bit sort of undercooked, if you like. It makes me chuckle now, Peter, when I think back to this. I can remember this very clearly. The first weekend of the season, I was at Mourneview Park. Various occupants in the press box were listening to the radio. Carrick are 3-0 down after half an hour at Crusaders. And us journalists, that was Carrick were down as their relegation favourites. Oh, Stephen Baxter, he's yesterday's man, and blah, blah, blah. There were some fairly large portions of humble pie being served up by the end of that game when Carrick came back to win it, and then embarked on that really good start to the campaign. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Stephen Baxter has won multiple titles and trophies, and why the likes of me would struggle to win anything, even playing Football Manager. I think, probably a few eyebrows raised some of the players Carrick signed in the summer. they've moved on a few of the old guard who were maybe coming to the end of their playing careers, but then sort of they kind of replaced them with maybe players of a similar age profile, the likes of Billy Joe Burns and Jimmy Callagher and Adam Leckie and the likes. But I mean, obviously, you do need experience, you do need leaders in there. I think Carrick hit that bit of a sticky period after that good start, which probably coincided with Paul Heatley's absence after that unfortunate head injury. But
and Leckie's injury as well.
yeah, Leckie was a big miss for them as well. But Stephen Baxter was at pains last week when I was speaking to him to point out that Carrick, they've been competitive in all those games. They haven't been sort of overrun by any stretch of the imagination. So they'll be glad to have come out on the right side of a close one on this occasion against Portadown.
And look, condolences to Stephen Baxter and the whole family.
Absolutely.
After the death of his mother. So that's good for Carrick. Again, I think we'll just have to see how they go up against maybe better sides, and if maybe a gap starts to emerge. Again, with these games being called off, it's really hard to tell how poor this start has been for Cliftonville Crusaders, and if really how low are they actually going to languish, because they've had these bright sparks, and obviously Carrick have had them. But what a weird week for Portadown, because they lose a majority of their backroom staff. It's slightly unique in the sense that you have Clifford Adams as well as John McAllister, who was a part of this kind of expanded backroom team at Portadown, kind of departs. And you add that in that there's been a bit of a change up during the summer with likes of analysis and, kind of physios and stuff. Like, you talk to people who are fans of Portadown, and there just continues to be smoke around what's going on behind the scenes and what direction they're pulling in. The results have been good in the sense that they're not at Glenavon, but you're starting to wonder, like, if it wasn't for the fact that Glenavon were so bad, could they be in a lot worse of a position than perhaps maybe their points total and their league position tells us?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, just sort of to touch upon what you mentioned there, but I think maybe sometimes football fans kind of downplay that sort of thing about, coaching staff and things like that there. But you have to remember, Niall and Cliffy and John, they've been together for a few seasons at different clubs, and Cliffy and John will be with two of Niall's most sort of trusted lieutenants. So it will be interesting to see if Niall can create that sort of working relationship with someone new. They're sort of Portadown missing the creative spark of Shay McCartan, but possibly a bigger concern maybe at the other end of the pitch. Again, this is one of those sort of things that has kind of slipped under the radar. They've actually, Portadown have conceded as many goals in the league as Glenavon have. So it's one of those where probably going to have to be sort of tightening the door at the back a bit.
Is that how the season's going to go? It's going to be like, and this stat is as bad as Glenavon.
Poor Glenavon.
Oh, they're getting it tough. They're getting it tough.
No, but no, there is. I suppose there is a serious point there of Portadown. They're maybe not scoring as many as they would like, and certainly if you're not scoring as many as you like, in a sort of Ballymena-esque fashion, the thing to do is to try and keep it tight at the other end, then, isn't it? And Portadown are probably shipping more goals than Niall or Portadown fans would like.
I don't know if they've had a clean sheet this season or not.
Not honestly sure. I just happened to notice that was the sort of the figure, because it kind of jumped out of the league table at me that they had conceded as many.
Like if you read online and you read people that are frustrated with the leadership and the way things are going from who's making the calls there, there's plenty of people that would suggest and say the situation that Glenavon are in, would that not be kind of the warning sign of if there's fans out there that are looking to change, for who and how is that going to help, especially with the recent track record that Niall Curry has at that club and elsewhere?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And I mean, again, Portadown are in that sort of, they're in the dreaded second season back, which is kind of done for Loughgall, went after 2 seasons. Newry went after 2 seasons in the top flight. it's obviously it's a whole lot harder second time round to try and maintain or and to even to try and improve. The other thing as well, sort of just looking a wee bit further down the track there, and I'm sure this won't be lost on Portadown fans, just looking ahead at the forthcoming fixtures there. Portadown's next 4 league games are against the 4 full-time teams. So again, once, in a month's time, what might we be looking at with Portadown unless they can sort of pull out a couple of big results there?
So they're entering the Ballymena gauntlet.
That's it. Yes. No, I mean, obviously, it's a hugely difficult task for part-time. I mean, it always comes back, doesn't it, to this part-time, full-time debate. And I think managers of clubs in both of those categories hate talking about it. It's almost become sort of like the elephant in the room, because part-time managers, I think, feel as if they're sort of sounding like a broken record when they say it. And full-time managers don't want to say too much about it, because then sometimes you can come unstuck, as a couple of them have done recently. Larne losing at Dungannon and Coleraine losing at Bangor. So it's one of those where it'll always come up. It's always sort of in any debate, I think, Peter, now about the Irish League, that whole part-time, full-time thing is kind of hovering over it like some sort of sword of Damocles there. It's always gonna come up, but certainly very, very difficult looking fixture list ahead for Portadown.
Hey, we're not your average podcast here. We're getting Greek references mixed amongst it all. We look ahead to this weekend, and are we close to a full selection of games after our little mini weekends that we've had? Saying that, we'll be able to beef out this podcast with further analysis. Perhaps all those teams will appreciate, particularly if you're going well, a deeper look at your squad. With the return of 6 games, you've got a game on Friday, and it's that start of that. Well, I called it the Ballymena Gauntlet because they've taken their first step onto it. Portadown host Linfield. Even before losing to Newry and losing to Carrick, and the fact that they've potentially not kept the clean sheet all season, I think the chances of Portadown catching Linfield cold is small.
Unless, of course, Linfield suffer a similar fate to Glentoran after the sort of mini disruption to their momentum. Difficult to see beyond a Linfield victory, I would have thought, in this one. But who knows? As I said earlier, if a team's playing and winning most weeks, things seem much easier. It's just you can't always just sort of flick it on and off like a light switch there. It may be difficult for Linfield to come back from their mini break and pick up where they left off, but I would still fancy them to have too much for Portadown.
Yeah, I would strongly back you there. I would say multiple goal win there for Linfield, maybe upwards of 3-1. It's probably, if you're like many teams in this situation from a Portadown point of view, just try and not be a couple of goals down early, and maybe even close to half time, and you never know. Tasty won this, a Clandy boy. Bangor against Crusaders. Can Bangor keep up the momentum? Many people will think yes. We all know what this game was like when it was played earlier on in the season. It was bonkers. And plenty of Bangor fans will think, between the missed penalties and the red cards, we should have won this game.
Yeah, that could have been another 3 points that Bangor could have had on the board.
They're getting greedy now.
When you think back on it, they could well have done. Again, that should be a very interesting game. Bangor will be a match for anybody, especially at Clandyboy Park. I think sort of sometimes there you look at that sort of, particularly when you see it on the TV, the surface at Clandyboy Park doesn't look like one of the better artificial surfaces in the league. So I think
that's putting it lightly.
I think Bangor will try and use that to their advantage there. Crusaders, another club that's, again, as you touched upon earlier, can we really get an accurate reading of Crusaders from the fact that they've played less games than a lot of other clubs? To me, sort of the early indications are, I think Crusaders have a lot of attacking threat. I think some of the a number of the Scottish players that they brought in definitely can make them potent at one end. I just think there's a wee bit of sort of defensive frailty possibly at the other end. I think Crusaders can score goals, but equally I think they'll let a few in. I think this could be a high scoring draw, something like a 2-2.
Yeah, if any of these games, looking at this collection, is going to be a thriller, it's this one. Fancy the Cruise. I just think that despite all the hype I was giving Bangor and how well they can organise, I think there's maybe just a few little gateways that Crusaders could exploit. Huge win if Bangor can win this and get 18 points this early. Massive, and would actually probably heap a lot of misery onto Cruise in the situation they are in this table. Yes, they have games in hand, but they don't really want to be sitting around 11th because they could face a similar Ballymena gauntlet in the future, and they'd rather be out of there rather than down looking up. So yeah, I'm going to go for Cruise there. I'm going to say 3-1. Cliftonville against Larne. This is, there's been minor moments of light for Cliftonville. Still no word on this takeover thing, despite the fact that everything's been quiet on the pitch. That still kind of rings out as the big question mark. I know they got caught slightly cold 2 weeks ago, but we kind of know what that Dungannon side's all about right now. I think despite it being away from home, yes, again, this was a bit of an odd game where there was red cards and penalties and all the rest back at Solitude earlier on, I believe. But yeah, I'm going to back Lauren here quite strongly, even though it'd be like 2-1.
Yeah, I think the whole Cliftonville thing you've touched upon it there, Peter. Just this takeover is just sort of hovering in the background, isn't it? And I think possibly until there's a bit more clarity on that, no matter how much managers and players say, "Oh, it's not our job to get involved in that," it's our jobs to look after what goes on in the pitch. I think it's almost impossible to shut that sort of speculation and just that kind of uncertainty. I think it's almost impossible to shut that out entirely. So not pleasant reading if you're a Cliftonville fan looking at the league table and seeing them as low as that. Again, Jim Magilton probably feels every season that he's been there's been sort of a major overhaul has been required at the start of each season. Again, how long can he keep sort of pulling these rabbits out of the hats and then if someone does do well, how long can they hold on to that player? So they'll obviously be looking to try and get a bit of a run going. Very tough game against Larne. Again, how do Larne react to that setback at Dungannon? They were flying before that there. Again, like Glentoran, they're starting to get their players who were suspended following the infamous Battle of Inver Park at the end of last season, and perhaps the key one is having Leroy Miller back fit and available again. So I really hope that Leroy can put that dreadful spell of injury behind him and get back to being the player who basically spearheaded Larne's first league title.
Well, we talked about earlier on about how good Coleraine is. We then talk about the hot form Dungannon are, and just like this league promises to on most weeks, they're facing off up at the Coleraine showgrounds. Based on previouss, Dungannon are usually up for these games and are usually a real challenge, and I think this will be very similar. It'll be a big statement, I think, if Coleraine can win, even though it being at home. I think this is one of those tricky fixtures where they've got to show that they can hold their poise and deliver the kill shot. I just think that Dungannon will be tricky, and if they can, of course, get that goal, they'll try and shut it down. I'm going to go for 1-1 here.
Yeah, this is sort of definitely the type of game if Coleraine have aspirations of challenging for the league title, and I don't know how much a lot of their fans would be saying no it's a season too early for us, European football this season, push on for the title the next. I personally think the way that they've signed the players that they already have, I think they do have all the elements to mount a serious challenge. But this is exactly the sort of game that if you're going to be there or thereabouts, that you're going to have to try and win a real tricky one against an opponent who's banging form. Great to see Dungannon getting back to that sort of level again. The name one of the names that's sort of popped up a lot in recent weeks, really impressive, is Leo Alves. Again, you have the likes, Keelan Dillon, a really creative player there as well for Dungannon. It's a really tricky task, but I think Coleraine will just edge this one.
Fair enough. Glenavon Carrick. I've been here a couple of weeks where I'm saying, oh, is this the chance for Glenavon to bounce through? Like, there's a chance here in the sense that here comes O'Connor and his backroom team, and the first thing they'll do is try and steady the ship. Carrick Rangers don't have a huge amount of goals in them, so if Glenavon can just maybe steady the ship in the sense of just try and remove the mistakes and play football at a level where you're not gifting the ball to the other side, perhaps they can just strike it lucky, and those few chances which Carrick will carve out, if they're not in the back of the net, then Glenavon get a point. I'm going to back them here, and I'm going to go 0-0.
Yeah, I think we've been so down on Glenavon, haven't we, in this podcast? I think that at some point, although I've been saying this for the past number of weeks, at some point this has got to turn. Let's be positive here. Let's see Glenavon stop the rot this week, even with a point from a 1-1 draw.
Yeah, I mean, if there's Glenavon fans coming out here and saying, I completely disagree, how dare you say that? I think it's probably more from a place of, only I can but only I can say this team is rubbish, not you. But yeah, look, a point would be, I think, a huge, because it's all just about getting that mentality and rhythm again, because they're just so helpless and down in the dumps. But in turn, there's the pressure to make sure that they take their opportunity while it's there, because Carrick Rangers at home, that is in the zone of potential success. And then final one, Glentoran host your boys Ballymena. What's the record been like at the Oval? Because I can't remember too many victories.
Up until probably the last 3 or 4 years, Peter, Ballymena had a really good record at the Oval. I think they had, I can't remember the exact figure now, but basically for something like about 12 or 13 seasons, if Ballymena had gone to the Oval, say maybe twice in the league and maybe once in a cup competition for about 12 or 13 seasons, or something like 11 out of 12 or something like that, Ballymena would have won at the Oval at some point during the season. That has sort of dried up a bit in recent seasons. This is again a bit like the sort of the Glentoran, or a bit like the Coleraine Dungannon game. This is a big test here of Glentoran. This is the sort of thing where if they're going to have serious aspirations of challenging, this is the type of game they're going to have to win. They're going to have to do it from coming back from that first defeat. How will they react to that? All these are the questions that will all be answered. I think Ballymena would be quite happy probably to pick up a point here, but I think Glentoran will just shade it maybe by 2-1.
You'll feel slightly confident, surely, off the back of that result last week. No Jenkins. Maybe they're struggling to get the rhythm that got them to where they were. There's a sneaky party, you know.
Well, again, you look at the players who are coming back there. First of all, I think sort of Pat Hoban will be a really good signing for Glentoran. Looks just like a proper centre forward. Just I've seen him a couple of times. Looks really good. You've got Joe Thompson back there now from injury. Again, it's just a matter of how will Glentoran deal mentally with the setback of losing at Dungannon. I think if they get back on an even keel, I think will probably feel that they can take full points at home to Ballymena.
I think they probably will. It's just that situation where I think Glentoran can be dangerous when they want to be, and they'll probably get just 2 goals, which I think will just be too much for Ballymena to fight back against. But, if Ballymena can check off these slow starts and attack the game from the off and get that goal and build up a bit of momentum, there's a chance. But yeah, 2-1, not surprised if it's 1-1 though. Stephen, it's great to have you back. First time of the season. I'm sure it won't be the last either.
Pleasure, Peter. Thank you for having me.
I mean, I wish you and all your Ballymena ones the best of luck. I asked this last week, and I know it's kind of too early right now, but based on what you've seen and the way things are going, Do you have somebody earmarked as the best of the rest, aka fifth right now? And who would you have as 11th? Super early,
Um,
but early indications are who's 11th, who's fifth. Sorry, Glenavon.
those positions could be sort of almost interchangeable, Peter, by the end of the season. There, fifth and 11th. Um, Obviously, there'll be a few of the sides. Dungannon will have their eye on trying to get as close to the top four as possible. Ballymena obviously are ambitious. They've put a lot of money into it. They'll be aiming for it. I think there will be an awful lot of movement between those sort of fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth positions there. I think down towards the bottom end of the table, there'll be a lot of teams sort of looking very anxiously at other teams' results. I think matches between the likes of Portadown and Carrick, which we saw at the weekend. I think direct head-to-head matches between those type of teams will be really important. Um, Difficult to say who could be 11th. That may depend on who goes on sort of a mini run of form to pull themselves out of it, or equally who goes on a bit of a slide and comes sort of careering down the table. I think you'll probably be looking at the sort of maybe the Carricks and Portadowns, but who's to say that maybe Crusaders couldn't be dragged down in there either?
And best of the rest, fifth.
Fifth, possibly, if things continue on their current
Go on,
trajectory.
say it.
Maybe Dungannon.
You wanted to say
Possibly Dungannon.
Ballymena, but you're being too kind. Yeah, could be anybody's. Could be Bangor. You just don't know. But yes, wonderful insight. A whole lot of experience. I just think everyone could tell just pouring out of you there. I look forward to over the next few weeks getting back out there and maybe sharing an open air press box with you over the next while. But until then, I'll chat to you soon.
Thank you, Peter. Take care.
So as that podcast was recording, the final whistle blew and Northern Ireland missed out on a victory against Germany. Frustrating, but they did give it a mighty good go in the second half. And once again, it's been said before, but it's so great to see so many players who not only got their start in the Irish League, but played significant minutes. And now, instead of having to deal with a Joel Cooper or a Jordan Stewart, who was the absolute pinnacle of wide players only a couple of years ago for the likes of Hume, now he's got like Multimata and Nabry to deal with. Wow. Plenty of opportunities for us all. And with that being said, plenty of opportunities to listen to this podcast. If you happen to be new here, you can subscribe if you wish on whatever your platform is. Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Just go to the main page, which has Kick a Match on it, or the Kick a Match main page is what I'm trying to say. And then follow, subscribe. It's free and it gives you a little notification when I pop this out, as you've noticed with holidays and rather crazy work schedules at the minute. The whole Tuesday thing. It's a struggle, but I'm still delivering it week to week. If you fancy it, you're welcome to listen to me in Radio Ulster, because I've been covering for Amory Was 6 o'clock every day between Monday and Thursday, between that and 7:30. So it'd be nice to see you there if you wish, if you just want to hear my voice, not talking about Irish League football. But if you want to hear more about me talking Irish League football, well, I'll see you next week. I'll be waiting.